Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is presented by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, the industry's #1 specialty travel company and the fly shop for the world of fly fishing. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now your host, author, photographer, and world traveler, Jim Klug.
Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast where we explore the stories and destinations that make fly fishing truly unforgettable. In this episode, we'll be visiting one of the most iconic fisheries in all of saltwater, Christmas Island. Situated in the vast Central Pacific, Christmas Island, or Carisimas as it's known locally, is the largest coral atoll in the world, offering some of the finest flats fishing found anywhere. The atoll has long been considered a must-fish destination for saltwater fly anglers, offering an expansive network of flats, lagoons, and coral reefs teeming with fish. From bonefish and triggerfish to the adrenaline-pumping pursuit of giant, bluefin, and golden trevally, the atoll offers incredible diversity and endless opportunities. It's a place where each day on the flats presents new challenges and rewards, a fishery where anglers can truly immerse themselves in the simplicity and beauty of the saltwater fly fishing experience. Christmas is part of the Republic of Kiribati, a nation of atolls and low-lying islands scattered throughout the Central Pacific. Its history encompasses early Polynesian visits, European exploration, military utilization, nuclear testing, and today, a constant influx of international anglers. It is a tranquil and remote destination known for its natural beauty, including extensive coral reefs and diverse bird populations. It is also one of the first inhabited places on Earth to experience the new year, due to its position in the world's farthest forward time zone. My guest today is Bryant Dunn, the co-owner and director of guest services at Christmas Island Lodge. Bryant has spent decades immersed in the world of destination angling, carving out a reputation as a knowledgeable and experienced outfitter with the ability to run programs in remote, off-the-grid locations where logistics are always a challenge. His journey to Christmas Island began with a love for fishing that took him to some of the most legendary saltwater destinations in the world. When the opportunity arose to take the reins at Christmas Island Lodge, Bryant and his partners embraced the challenge of refining and elevating the atoll's lodge experience to ensure visiting anglers enjoy access to this remarkable fishery in the best way possible. In this episode, the first of a two-part series on Christmas Island, Bryant takes us behind the scenes of Christmas Island Lodge, sharing what makes the operation distinctive, what anglers can expect when they arrive on the atoll, and why this fishery remains one of the most sought-after saltwater destinations in the world. Whether you're planning your first trip to Christmas Island or dreaming of returning, this conversation will leave you inspired to pack your rod and book your tickets to one of the most unique saltwater fisheries on the planet. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. Waypoints is sponsored by Patagonia. To bring their gear to life, Patagonia is motivated by relentless curiosity and a passion for the wild. They evaluate hundreds of materials, build dozens of prototypes, and spend seasons punishing them in the world's most extreme conditions. The work is the guide, and Patagonia never tires of exploring, learning, and improving. Be sure to check out Patagonia's new Swift Current waders, repatterned and redesigned for bulk reduction, reduced seam stress, increased maneuverability, and improved repairability. Made from recycled materials without intentionally added PFAS, Swift Current waders move better in and out of the water. We are back to talk about Christmas Island with our guest, Bryant Dunn. Bryant, welcome back to Waypoints. It's always good to sit down and have a great conversation with you.
It's great to be back, bud. Happy to be here.
You are a veteran of several Waypoints podcasts, and we've in the past talked about Bhutan. We've done some amazing trips together, but today we're going to be talking about Christmas Island and your particular operation, Christmas Island Lodge.
Absolutely. Very excited to talk about it.
Well, let's start with the basics. For those who have never been, What makes Christmas Island Atoll such a unique and world-renowned destination for fly fishing? What's special about the atoll?
Well, let's just start with the topography. I mean, you are talking about the world's largest coral atoll. And for those who aren't sure what atolls are, not familiar with that term, really what it is a coral cap to a volcano. And a series of atolls would be the volcanoes, the hot spots that would have erupted with lava, then they would have died out. Actual tectonic plate movement would have occurred, leaving a trail of islands, basically, that eventually are capped with coral and creating some incredible fisheries throughout, in this case, the Central Pacific Ocean.
And, I mean, there are atolls all throughout the world, in the Caribbean, in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific. This, as you mentioned, the largest in the world. It is an impressively large fishery out there in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah, and it really, you know, as you well know, Jim, having spent time out there with us and on your own previously, you're not just talking about one fishery. When it comes to Christmas Island, you're really talking about three distinct fisheries on one atoll. And what I'm referring to is the inner lagoon. If you've been to Christmas Island and fished there, you've certainly fished the inner lagoon. Certainly everybody would. And by the way, that inner lagoon is about 150 square miles of saltwater fishing. You know, we're talking ankle deep to knee deep primarily, depending on the tidal fluctuations, the tidal range, which actually is pretty minimal compared to many places in the world. So you've got 150 square miles of coral sand flats.
In the inner lagoon.
That's just the inner lagoon. And, you know, Christmas Island makes up about 70% of the actual landmass of the Republic of Kiribati, and an equal amount, about 150 square miles of landmass there on the atoll. That's one fishery. But then you have a backcountry fishery area with much more topography, little bays, little islands. It's all coral. It's all dead coral out there for the most part. It's certainly that's exposed to the air. So that's your second fishery, the backcountry area. Specific places within the backcountry, you might have heard of the Huff Dam or the WWII site, places like that. And then you've got a third fishery, very distinct, and that would be the inner reef fishery. So it's that fishery on the outside of the atoll. We can refer to it as an island, but technically it's an atoll within the reef area, and that might have a distance from the actual beach of, say, 100 meters out to 300 to 400 meters, and the outside of that area measures some 93 miles. So you're talking about a minimum number of fishermen. You're talking about three distinct fisheries within the atoll, and endless opportunity for the saltwater angler.
Well, let's share a few interesting facts about Christmas Island to kind of start things off, because again, some of our listeners have been there in the past. Some, may want to go there in the future. Almost everybody who's familiar with saltwater fishing has heard of Christmas Island, but it was initially named by Captain Cook on Christmas Eve of 1777. I don't know that we would say he discovered it, because clearly the Polynesians had been there before, but as is often the case with, English and American sea captains of the time, he saw it and said, I believe I will name this place. And he did it. It was Christmas Eve, 1777, hence the Christmas Island title. It's also important that you don't confuse this Christmas Island with the other Christmas Island, which is in Australia. And that's important. There are two Christmas Islands. Christmas Atoll that we're talking about is much larger and has a completely different ecosystem than the Australian Christmas Island.
It truly does. Yeah, it's easy to get confused there. In fact, if you were to type Christmas Island on your iPhone and it would come up with a little meme, it's actually a Western Australia flag. It's not the Republic of Kiribati flag. So even the great AI wonders of the world still haven't got it entirely figured out. That confusion is justified. And if you don't mind, I'll just, when we talk about the history, you're referring to Captain James Cook, exceptional captain, cartographer. His history it truly is exceptional. He was a prodigy from the youngest of ages, but he actually wasn't really the first person to quote unquote discover. And I'm even talking about Europeans. That credit would go back to Hernando de Grijalva, and he was reported to have passed the island in 1537, and he did not land on the island. He did mark it down on his maps, and he referred to it as Acea, A-C-E-A. We don't know where that comes from. It could be his daughter's name. It could be any number of etymologies there we don't actually know. But so 1537, and that was really early in the exploration of the Europeans. That was way. I mean, you're talking 240 years before Captain James Cook. So what a deal there. And there were others that came along. But as you correctly note, that wasn't even who found this place, right? It was the Polynesians. And it's important to understand the history of Polynesia here a little bit. The term the Polynesian Triangle is one that's important to conceptualize. And that area, about 10 million square miles, is delineated by, it's a triangle. And so if you're looking at the globe and the Central Pacific, the Pacific Ocean in general, the lower left corner of that triangle would actually be New Zealand. And then if you were to head on a northeasterly direction vector, you would end up in the Sandwich Islands, which, by the way, are also known as Hawaii. And then you would head to the southeast, to the final point of the triangle, which would be Easter Island, and then connect Easter Island to New Zealand. And that is the Polynesian Triangle. It is one of the most interesting stories in human history, is the expansion, the migration of the Polynesians throughout that massive area and the hundreds and thousands of islands and atolls that exist in that expansive area, which is 99.9% open ocean. So you're talking about the best seafarers in the history of the world here, right? And specific to Christmas Island, between, depending on the historian you're speaking with, ethnologist would either say between about 1100 and 1450, some might say as late as 1250 to 1450, the Polynesians inhabited the Christmas Island area, the Northern Line Islands, and the surrounding Polynesian islands. But Christmas Island does not show proof of continued human existence there. In fact, really what it appears to be the case is that 180 miles to the northwest of Christmas Island is Fanning Island, Fanning Atoll. It's a far less well-known destination, very sparsely inhabited, incredibly beautiful. You've seen it with your own eyes. You recognize the uniqueness of that fishery and the culture there. But really, the permanent or semi-permanent human existence was on Fanning, and they would travel that 180 miles of open ocean to Christmas Island for hunting purposes. They'd retrieve birds, eggs, turtles, sharks, food sources, bring it back to Fanning. And that was how they coexisted. And that was very common within Polynesia, that you would have a home base island and you would veer off to different islands over the course of the year, the course of the seasons, depending on the winds and what we ended up referring to as trade winds, when they were blowing, and so on and so forth, so that you could maximize all of the resources in your extended world to survive. So that's really the history. And we know that's true because you can look into some of these older archaeological sites, these marae and these other habitation sites, and fire pits, for instance. And in those fire pits, you would find various different layers of ash, and then might be covered with soil, and then ash again. And when you have that soil, it's demonstrating that fires were not being burned at that time, right? So they come and go. And so anyway, yeah, it's a really fascinating history. There's much more to it than that, but that's a pretty good base. So for those who have been to Christmas Island and those that will come in the future, when you do land at Cassidy International Airport, just know people have been coming there for a long time and not on airplanes.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that, when you get there, you recognize immediately, Bryant, there's no mountains, there's no rivers, right? It's a coral atoll. It's incredibly flat with not much elevation at all. And that, when you go back to that kind of 1200 to 1450 AD period, is largely why it was a resource gathering location rather than a permanent habitation location, as you correctly point out, which I think is fascinating. People have been coming and going for centuries, right? It's incredible. The first recorded European sighting of the atoll, as you mentioned, was 1537, and then James Cook comes along, about 250 years later, and I love it. He's like, I'm going to name this, and clearly, he must have, been the bigger player in the game because his name stuck. Asia, the earlier name from the Spaniards, was kind of lost and relegated to the dustbins of history. But ever since, it's been Christmas Island.
Yeah, and we must talk about this story because Captain James Cook, this is exceptional. So Captain James Cook was basically working out of the UK, and he was going on all these expeditions. He was everywhere. He circumnavigated New Zealand. And remember, to get to this was a big deal. How do you get to the Pacific? Remember, Panama Canal was not in existence quite yet by then. And so actually on his third expedition, Captain Cook's third expedition, is when he encountered Kiribati or Christmas Island. And how did he get there? Well, he had to sail south around through the Straits of Magellan, really, Cape Horn at the southern end of
one of the spicier pieces of water on the planet.
Oh, the Cape of Good Hope, Cape Horn. These are the places you go, recognizing you got a double-digit percentage of dying when you go there each time that you go there in each direction, if indeed that's the route you're taking. So he did that, and he got out there. He was, among many other things, they were working for cartography. And a big part of what they were actually doing, Captain Cook and the others that were following him and that had preceded him somewhat, were looking for a supposed, almost mythic additional continent to the south, basically Antarctica. And they believed, for many reasons, all of which were wrong, that somewhere to the south you had a lush, green, paradisic continent that was going to be the promised land and the next Europe, essentially. Okay, now we all know that that's not true, and that was failure. But expedition goes out looking for this place, and it was never found because it never existed. But in their efforts to find this place, they did certainly discover many other places, and specifically in regard to Christmas Island, as you said, Captain James Cook arrives on December 24th, 1777, Christmas Eve, thus the name. He anchors up to the western edge of Christmas Island, right behind what is now known as Cook Island. It's an islet in between the western and southwestern points of London and Paris at the opening to the inner lagoon. And so he anchors right there, and he spends 10 days. And a few of his sailors go on land to try to go find turtles and food sources, fresh water also. They got turned around. It's flat. It's almost on the equator.
They got lost.
Absolutely got lost because the sun was straight up. They couldn't, once you get into the salt brushes there that are just higher than your head, you actually can't tell looking up at the sun which direction you're walking or where you just walked. And if you look down, stare at your feet and take 10 steps and turn around, you really have no idea where you've come from or where you're going. And it's not sand, right? You can't follow your footprints back unless you're on the beach, which they definitely weren't on the inner lagoon. So he spends 10 days there. And on New Year's Day of 1778, witnesses a total solar eclipse. He was at the point of totality there in that time. And that was not a freak occurrence. He had traveled there working with the Geographic Society out of London, looking to, certainly execute cartography, but specifically working on longitudinal lines, which at a total solar eclipse would allow them to do some very accurate measurements. And the application of those measurements directly related to discovering very, very closely, very accurately, the distance from the Earth to the moon. Now, this is incredible. This is just a guy sailing around the world, but he's contributing to the scientific body in a way that no one ever had before. And that, now you can imagine, we now know how far the moon is from the Earth. Well, this is addressing some really major scientific questions, religious implications. Oh, yeah. It goes on and on, right? So again, Christmas Island, this is more than just a fishery. It's got an amazing history.
Absolutely. And then we fast forward to kind of the late 1800s. Permanent settlement on the atoll began right around 1882, primarily involving workers on coconut plantations, as well as some commercial fishing. In 1902, the British government granted a 99-year lease to a coconut operation that subsequently planted over 70,000 coconut palms and introduced pearl oysters to the lagoon, which is kind of interesting. Severe drought, however, led to the abandonment of these efforts in 1905. everyone leaves. It was not until 1917 when someone pops back on the scene, and this is another character in the history of Christmas Island, a French priest named Father Emmanuel Roger. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Roger might be a way. Yes, you got it. You got it.
Yeah, he leases the island, plants an additional 500,000 coconut trees, and at that point started establishing various settlements throughout the islands itself. The French priest was quite an interesting fellow. Tell us some stories about this guy.
So he really was. So Emmanuel Rougier, Father Emmanuel Rougier, hailed from Paris. He was a Frenchman, and he operated in the highest social circles within Paris at that time, very much so. Of course, he was an adventurer. He was quite a personality. In fact, it was said that though he was celibate and a priest, it is also true that he traveled with a young woman everywhere he went, who was of incredible beauty and poise. And
I'm sure she was just a scribe or something like that.
Just a baggage handler.
Yeah.
So it is hard to say, but he had incredible impact there. He basically ran the show. And it wasn't just Christmas Island. It was also included Fanning, and it also included Washington Island to the northwest as well. So he ranged around there.
He was kind of the governor of the region at that point.
He was, and his homestead was out on Paris Point there to the southwest tip of the island across from London, current modern day London. And so he was a very influential person. And you hear stories about the way that he interacted with the plantation workers. It's not a pretty story. And, you know, in those days around the world, there were individuals running shows like that behaved in those ways that aren't worth going into. They're not relevant to our modern day here, hopefully, anymore. But colorful personality, very powerful force there. And again, just one of many, many interesting personalities in the history of Christmas Island.
Yeah. Well, then from the early part of the 1900s, we hit the World War II period, and Christmas Island held significant strategic importance in the Pacific theater. The island was occupied by Allied forces, with the United States establishing a garrison there to prevent Japanese control. Obviously, that would have threatened supply routes between Hawaii and Australia in a big way. An airstrip was then constructed to support an Air Force weather station and communications center, and to provide rest and refueling facilities for aircraft traveling between Hawaii and other locations in the South Pacific. The first contingent of American forces included a company from the 102nd Infantry Regiment, which was a National Guard unit from New Haven, Connecticut, interestingly enough. And while Christmas Island itself did not witness any direct combat during World War II, its role as a logistical hub definitely contributed to the broader Allied war effort in the Pacific. And then, again, a few years later, during the late 1950s and early 1960s, this is when history gets really serious on Christmas. It was a significant site for nuclear weapons testing conducted by both the United Kingdom and the United States. Between 1957 and 58, the United Kingdom carried out a series of nuclear tests known as Operation Grapple, with test detonations conducted over or near the island. They were the first to utilize Christmas for nuclear testing, and I think they did something like 6 nuclear tests. Is that right?
Well, the British did actually in the region, in the area, and including Grapple X, Y, and Z. Thus, by the way, when you go there and you fish the Y site or the X site or the Z site, if you hear those terms, that's exactly what they're talking about. These are the launch sites for these hydrogen bomb testings. So 9 there for the British. Those were actually nine total in that area.
Yeah. And then in 62, the United States says, okay, we're not going to just give this to the Brits. They've done their testing. Now we're going to come in and we're really going to do some serious testing. They initiated what was called Operation Dominic, which was a series of, I think, something like 31 nuclear test explosions in response to the Soviet Union's resumption of testing after a moratorium. Christmas served as a primary location for these tests, with, again, multiple detonations occurring over or near the island.
Yeah, what an amazing thing. And by the way, I do want to jump back just for a couple stories that lead up to this, but let's recognize that there were no evacuations during these tests. Okay, so the people were not removed from the island. After a few of these tests, again, as you mentioned, 9 by the Brits and eventually 31 by the United States over the course of this period of time, from 1957 to 1962, evacuations were not taking place. So these bombs, which were generally detonated by using weather balloons, so they would launch these things up, get them X number of 1,000 feet above the island or just off the coast of the island, immediately next to the island, these detonations would take place. And stories exist about the local inhabitants, the Polynesians, the Kiribati people, as well as the American, British, Fijian, and New Zealander Army and Navy personnel on the island, being advised to turn their backs to the detonations and to form their fists and basically put them in front of their eyes, into their eye sockets, to block that flash of light. And apparently the stories go that when the detonations would take place, the light was so intense they could see through their eyelids and through their hands like an X-ray machine, so that they could actually see the bones within the hands as these flashes are going on. So what could possibly go wrong? How could there possibly be any negative, anatomical damage there? But of course, that actually is something that has been pursued even up to the modern era, and they did see birth defects, and they did see challenging labors and infant mortality and some other things. So that's a different topic. But yeah, that's what was going on here.
The dark side of the testing right there.
It was the dark side. And so let's just step back a second, because you touched on some really important stuff. I want to go back to World War II, and then we're going to step back even just a touch further before we move forward. And so World War II, if you are a student of World War II, and I know you are, Jim, absolutely, that the Battle of Tarawa, or Tarawa in the Kiribati language, which is also known as Gilbertese, by the way, was one of the bloodiest, nastiest hand-to-hand battles in World War II. And it was between the Japanese and the Allied forces, and the stories are terrible. The Japanese were holding Tarawa, and then the Allied forces came in their ships, and then they offloaded amphibious vehicles that were going to crawl over the reefs and onto the shore and attack, and they figured they had a pretty good plan. Well, lo and behold, they screwed up, and they misjudged the tides. And so when they offloaded those amphibious units, they got stuck on the reefs. They could not move, or they got all hung up on the topography. And then, of course, they were just sitting ducks for the machine guns that were going off. It was horrible. And then they had to rush, waist deep as they were just being picked off, until eventually getting to the beach, and then raiding these encampments. And it's a horrible, terrible story. That is absolutely all Republic of Kiribati based. So if you want to read about that, there's a lot of historical records on that, but definitely just be prepared for a nasty story there. World War II. Yep. And so Christmas Island specifically was occupied by the Allies at that time to make sure the Japanese didn't occupy it, so that they couldn't block basically the supply route from Hawaii to Australia. So that was trying to secure that supply route, which was very, very important. So, again, much more history. If the biggest thing that's coming through your mind on Christmas Island is whether or not you should be tying on an orange Christmas Island special or a pink one, just know there's a whole lot more that got us to where we are today. And as we do step back just a little bit more, let's go back towards World War I for a minute. There's a great story about that it was really sort of the second coming of Christmas Island. The plantations, the coconut plantations, were now being established, had been there for a few years. The new plantation manager, there was always a plantation manager, the head honcho. And Joe English, in this case, is the person we're talking about, and he arrived in 1915. He had a couple of assistants, and that happened to be right at the time that the Spanish flu broke out. So Joe had been dropped off. He was supposed to get picked up a year and a half later, and in Tahiti and other places where the Spanish flu was circulating, people were dying by the droves, and essentially Joe they forgot about him. He was stranded on Christmas Island, and he waited there for, about 4 years. He ended up being there stranded unexpectedly from 1917 to 1919. And when Admiral John Jellicoe came, a British admiral, actually came back to the island and came on the island to rescue him and pull him back to civilization. Well, English had no idea that World War I was over yet. He thought it was a German ship approaching the island, and he actually came out of the salt brush with a pistol pulled and aimed at the head of Admiral Jellicoe. And Jellicoe had to, in a British accent, obviously, talk him down and help him to understand that the war was over and that the Germans had lost and the UK had won and life was good. And so what an incredible standoff that would have been to view. But so again, the history is exceptional, and so that takes us back to World War I, II, and getting closer to the modern day.
Well, hopefully, Joe English, they left him at least with like an 8-weight while he was there for all those years. That would have been nice back in the day. But at one point in time, kind of bringing the 40s, 50s, 60s all together, the island was home to a lot of old equipment and junk from all of these testing years, from all the military occupation. There used to be like graveyards of equipment and trucks and all kinds of testing paraphernalia that was left behind by the Brits and the Americans. But you go there now, and all those relics are gone.
Yeah, it was remediated by a British group that came in and did absolutely remove all of those items. So what was a rusty junkyard is now the island's pristine. If you look at it, it truly is pristine. You will find, if you're paying attention and looking for it, you will find old foundations of what must have been aqueducts, and you will find old foundations of docks and metal that's melting. And really, it melts. The salt is so intense there. It just melts everything. You could leave a container, and I certainly know where several of these are, that have been there for 10 years, and the roof of this metal shipping container is gone. It's non-existent. The walls are full of holes, and it's only because of the salt fog that we refer to it as salt fog will permeate into these metals and take them apart. So what you're left with now is a very pristine island that goes for the landmass itself, that goes for the inner lagoon, it goes for the exterior, the inner reef that is exterior to the island, and you feel like you're in a paradise. And if you walk the beaches there, unlike any beaches I have seen in many of my travels around the world, these are pristine. You could walk 200 yards without seeing any sign of there's no plastic, there's no metal, there's no, the thing you're most likely to see are probably parts of shipwrecks that have washed up on the bank anywhere from 20 to 220 years ago that are laying there. So you're talking about a very pristine ecosystem, a very pristine fishery, and an absolutely beautiful island to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. And those places are getting harder to find, sadly. So we talked about the kind of the history of Christmas Island. Let's talk a little bit more about the evolution and history of fly fishing on the atoll, because we've gone through all these years, the different world wars, the coconut plantations, the early explorations. The exploration of the atoll's fly fishing potential began probably sometime in the 1970s, for all that we know. Anglers were drawn to the island's extensive flats. They knew they were teeming with bonefish. They knew there were trevally and triggerfish there. Early expeditions, again, from anglers revealed the abundance and size of these species and pretty quickly established Christmas as a prime location for saltwater fly fishing. While I have no idea, Bryant, who the first fly fishermen were to visit, explore, and ultimately introduce the fishery to the world, I know that some of the early efforts to kind of promote Christmas Island came from like Mike Fitzgerald and his travel company back in the day, and then Kaufman's Streamborn, which was an absolutely legendary fly shop and travel service out of the Northwest, out of Oregon. They were certainly one of the first to really promote and begin marketing Christmas Island, helping to put it on the map in angling circles. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So the history, I think you've summed it up very nicely, and that is, probably in the late 1970s into the early 80s, Kaufman's was there, Kaufman's Streamborn. And I remember being a little boy and going into those stores way back in this, I guess for me it would have been in the 70s. And yeah, and they were there. But it was a new frontier at that time for saltwater angling. There's no question about that. How can you have angling travel if you don't have some level of infrastructure? And so that really and we're going to talk about this more later, I know, but the infrastructure that existed was essentially the remnants of the military presence there, the
old
barracks,
yeah.
the barracks, right? And there was a satellite monitoring station there that we'll talk a little bit about, but and basically the barracks were there, which later served to actually house the satellite monitors that were stationed there. But yeah, they got there as soon as they could. They got there as soon as it made sense, and there was some way to support them. And after the nuclear testing, the hydrogen bomb testing was over.
Yeah, that's good timing.
It is good timing, yeah.
You don't want to see the flash when you're on the flats. Well, Kaufman's is starting to send anglers there. It's getting well known in angling circles, especially back in the day, kind of that hardcore exotic destination angling crowd. It wasn't nearly as extensive as it is today. I mean, it was a big deal getting on an airplane and going to some of these far off places with fly rods in hand. In 1983, an article comes out in Sports Illustrated magazine that showcased the island fishery. It was an article called Greetings from Christmas, written by, I believe the author was named Clive Gammon. It talked about the amazing bone fishing, also referenced some great GT fishing that they found. And back in the day, in the early 80s, I mean, Sports Illustrated was huge. It was one of the biggest magazines in the country. So all of a sudden, Christmas is put out there to the world. And that put a lot of eyes back on the fishery. And at that point, it was kind of officially discovered as an angling destination. And you can Google that article up. You just put in, Sports Illustrated article on Christmas Island, again, called Greetings from Christmas, and you can read the whole thing. It's pretty funny. The author went there. He just brought spinning gear, got hooked up with a legendary guide named Eddie, who took them all around. At that point, there was still lots of military hardware and all the junk on the island before they cleaned it up. But it's an interesting article. You can Google it and read it. And then for the past 4+ decades since that article came out, Christmas's reputation has continued to grow, attracting anglers from around the globe. It is now considered one of the foremost kind of saltwater destinations. And local guides and operators and lodges have definitely evolved and developed very specialized knowledge of the area's fisheries, enhancing the experience for visiting anglers and giving us the Christmas Island offerings that we have today, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, it's oh boy. If I would just mention that Christmas Island is an exceptional fishery, or combination of diverse fisheries, as we were talking about earlier. But it is also a type of destination that is ideal not only for expert fly fishermen and women, but very much for beginners as well. The opportunity to travel to this place as someone who has never fished the flats or fished the salt or very little, you should expect to be quite productive. You may not be able to throw an 80-foot double haul into the wind, and frankly, not many anglers can do that, nor is it very common that you would need to do that. But you can come there. You can hopefully, ideally, practice your casting in advance. That's a theme we hear a lot in this industry. But even if you haven't mastered your double haul, I would tell you that 80 to 90% of hookups occur within 30 feet of the caster. So it's a dynamic fishery, but it's also a very available fishery for all skill levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to get into that. We're going to talk a little bit more about, seasons, how to get there, all that coming up, both at the end of this episode and in our part 2 episode. But, the growth of fly fishing tourism, Bryant, has definitely had a significant impact on Christmas's local economy. And in fact, today it's really the industry on the atoll. I mean, that's it. People come here because of the fishing. And it's very evident when you board that once a week flight that goes from Honolulu, flies to Cassidy International Airport on Christmas. 3/4 of the plane is filled with anglers, toting their rod bags and their waterproof backpacks. And everybody at that gate is getting on the plane to come to Christmas and fish for the week. How many lodges and operations are there currently on the atoll?
Well, actively there are about 5. There, on the fringe of that would be, a lodge or two that sometimes is hosting angling guests and sometimes some weeks is not. Perhaps the demand level is not as high for certain lodges as others. But you have some very, very robust outfits taking, in operation on that island. And just a few names that may be familiar to people would be Ikari House, and it would be The Villages, Sunset Horizon, a Lagoon View, and of course Christmas Island Lodge, and a couple other little nooks and crannies where people may occasionally stay. But that would sum up 95% of the lodge operations currently in operation.
And you see it on that airplane. It's pretty funny. You're checking in at Honolulu, and the whole kind of boarding area and the gate as they're waiting to board the plane, it's just full of anglers. Everybody's all excited. They're on their way. They're looking at flies and taking, equipment out and comparing notes. So it's a pretty fun dynamic on the way to Christmas Island. And then the plane, again, is just full of anglers.
Oh, the vibe is awesome. You're sitting there in Honolulu and HNL, and do understand that there's only one day a week do flights actually arrive on Christmas Island. And to be specific, at 11:50 p.m. from Nandi, Fiji, the Fiji Airways flight 822 departs. Then it's about a 4-hour flight and lands in Christmas Island around 6:30 in the morning. That same plane then after a quick layover for an hour and a half, unloads anglers mostly from New Zealand and Australia, if you're coming from that side of the world. And then it will bounce up to Honolulu, HNL. It'll land there around 10:45 in the morning. So, by the way, that would be carting off all of the anglers from Christmas Island heading back to North America. Think about your connections with other flights. If you're landing at 10:45, can you make a noon flight? Can you make a 1 flight? Usually, especially if you've got global entry, you can make it through those lines and do that. But then that flight will turn around and come directly back to Christmas Island on a noon departure on that Tuesday and land on Christmas Island 3 hours later on Wednesday, because you cross the international date line, and then bounce off and landing about 3:30 or so, 3:15. And then that flight would have its quick layover, reload, and head back to Fiji. So that's your sort of 24-hour travel reality. If you need to go home midweek, you're SOL. It's just not going to happen for you unless
one
you
flight a week.
Bring your G5 in from Honolulu. So we can talk about those logistics as well later.
Yeah. Well, I will say Christmas Island, from our perspective in the booking agency realm, during the pandemic, there was no place more difficult and challenging than Christmas Island. It was really the first international fishing destination to shut down during the pandemic, and it was the very last to open. It was about a 3-year period that it was kind of closed off and nobody was able to go there. For us, it was, we had hundreds of Christmas Island trips canceled, very challenging situation. But yeah, they were the first to close, the last to open. And so it, Christmas Island was definitely a challenging destination during those years for those of us in the business. And it's good to see it finally back in full operation.
Well, I mean, you're laughing, right? But I remember,
I am now.
Jim, you were not laughing a couple of years ago. I can remember you putting out something in some media forum. I don't remember exactly where, but, articulating that you had never been so frustrated with the destination before. I know personally I had 3 different round trip tickets booked on the 3 announced reopenings of the island, and that was really frustrating. And I'll tell you what, there was one actual event that prolonged this closure that's worth noting, and you don't hear much about. But in, I believe it was February 2022, and the island reopened in May of 23. So February 2022, about 15 months in advance of the actual reopening, the island was scheduled to open, and just in advance of that, Fiji Airways had its plane chartered by a church group, and not important who it was, doesn't matter, but this group of individuals was coming from Fiji. And so they did everything right. They quarantined in Nandi for 14 days. They were tested every single day. And eventually, all of them were clear. Everyone was good. No one was sick. The concern, of course, was that you would unleash COVID on a closed system, and then that would wreak havoc, of course. And so anyway, 54 individuals get on the Fiji Airways flight. They fly to CXI, Casti International Airport. They land. Everything's great. They test them after arrival, and 48 of 54 are infected with COVID. How it happened, where it happened, will never be known. But of course, then the airport security staff got infected, and it did run rampant to a very large degree. So all of a sudden, reclosure, and I was on the next week's flight. I was ready to go, and again, over and over it went. But yeah, we're laughing now. We weren't laughing then.
No, not at all. Well, Bryant, I want to hear more about your operation. I mean, we've gone through this fascinating history of Christmas Island, of the region, of the many years that, kind of led up to the discovery of Christmas Island by the fly fishing community and how it became this great international destination. Now I want you to talk a little bit about Christmas Island Lodge. When did things start for you guys, and what led to the launch of what I guess you could consider kind of a new lodge offering on the atoll these days? There were already numerous other operators in place. Talk to us a little bit about how Christmas Island Lodge came to be.
Well, Christmas Island Lodge is really is a modern interpretation springing from the original roots of international angling on Christmas Island, and it does go back to the history that we've talked about here, the barracks, and so. Originally the British barracks that were shared by the Americans, Fijians, and New Zealanders over time, 24 barrack rooms that were double occupancy, so that was housing 48 people at that time. And incidentally, there were up to 4,000 military personnel on Christmas Island during the hydrogen bomb testing era. But this was the headquarters. The British flag was raised there. The coat of arms was raised there. And eventually, after the military, not occupation, but the use of this area for military purposes came to a close, and it was completely closed. Really, I believe they lowered the coat of arms in 1965, but by 1969 it was over. You did have this missile tracking system and the satellite monitoring system known in those early years as NASDA. And so the barracks then became essentially the living quarters for the satellite monitoring station, which was 2-3 miles down the road. And which, by the way, is now operated, as far as anyone can tell, by JAXA, JAXA, which is the Japanese equivalent of NASA. There's space organization there. So JAXA, that continues. But you had these barracks that were then used for NASDA, and then that kind of petered out as JAXA took over and created their own lodgings on site with the satellite monitoring system. And here you had an unused set of rooms, which was then converted to the Captain Cook Hotel.
Of course, they're going to call it the Captain Cook, right? I mean, they had to. Yeah.
And of course, there's Captain Cook hotels all over the world, in Alaska and many other places. So it wasn't a unique name, but it certainly it was focused. It comes from the history that we've discussed already.
And so in the 1980s, these military barracks are converted from the living quarters that had been there, at that point, 30, 40 years, whatever it had been. It becomes the Captain Cook Hotel, and essentially the first establishment that was then able to cater to fly anglers on Christmas Island. Exactly.
So that's where the earliest anglers were staying. And that was great. And that continued on for a very long time until, just a couple of years before COVID hit. That was the primary place. If you were going fishing on Christmas Island in the 1980s, 1990s, you were staying at the Captain Cook, or the Captain, and it was often referred to. But that was an entity, an offering that, by many people's opinions, diminished in quality over time. Competition did arise. Other lodges that we've already named sprung up and came to be, and others that are no longer in operation. And so you did end up with a bit more robust set of offerings there, in addition to the Captain Cook. And then before COVID, the Kiribati government decided that, we're not having success running this operation. It's not working out for us. I think the last numbers I saw in 2017, they hosted 79 anglers over the course of the entire year. So they were really, it wasn't working well. And they decided, hey, let's consider opening this up to professional international operators in conjunction with the Kiribati government. So that would result in a joint venture. And they put that out there, and many heavy-hitting groups, outfitting groups, conglomerates came in and made bids for and submitted proposals for to be a member of this joint venture, and then to take over the operations of the Captain Cook in whatever way they saw fit. Well, it just so happened that one of my friends and the managing partner of our partnership at Christmas Island Lodge, Dan Bailey, was able to establish himself and win that contract. And he then followed to recruit a handful of partners, myself included, to form a team that could then not bring this thing from the ashes like the phoenix, but rather to really create something new. And so what we have done is exactly that. We've actually, the first thing that I did when I was sent there on site to essentially create the guest service experience and to physically develop the property in a way that could be offered to anglers was to completely separate the old Captain Cook from what we consider to be Christmas Island Lodge, our compound. So we had the local inhabitants and some of our employees worked very hard to weave about 4,400 palm fronds into columns that create fencing, so that we took a 20-acre parcel and designed it to be encompassed in a 2.3-acre area that focused on traditional thatch roof bungalows that are made of coral. The walls are made of coral, and in the spirit of the Polynesian style. And then not only did we create these thatch roof bungalow compound area, but we also built a new maniaba, which is a communal gathering area, or what you might refer to as a lounge in the new modern lodging nomenclature. And we also then brought in a Caribbean color scheme, so that each of these thatch roof bungalows, there's a yellow one, a pink one, a purple one, a blue one, and we've got a couple new ones, orange, red, and each of them are not numbered. It's not bungalow 1 through 7. They are named, and each of them are named after a species endemic to the island. So we've got the bonefish bungalow, we've got the milkfish bungalow, we've got the triggerfish bungalow, we've got the jeet suite, which that's
my favorite. That's where I stayed a couple of weeks back, was the jeet suite.
You gotta love it. Yeah. I put you in there on purpose because I knew you would. And that went on. Okay, well, that's just the physical nature of the property, but that's nothing without the people.
But at the same time, before you talk about the team and who's behind all of this, the setting is right on the beach. So as you're sitting in the maniaba, as you're having dinner, as you're enjoying drinks, you're looking right out onto an inner reef flat and this spectacular beach. The setting is amazing. Right next door to Christmas Island Lodge is the old Captain Cook Hotel. So that's still there. That's been renovated. A number of rooms have been redone. So that is still a functioning hotel and an option. But Christmas Island Lodge, while as you said, kind of rose from the great history of the Captain Cook location, it's on the premises, but they are separate, yet kind of adjoining operations.
Absolutely. Physically, they're separated, but as you said, we've renovated the old Captain too, and that is the we've got Christmas Island Lodge for our anglers, and we have Christmas Island Hotel for non-angling guests that travel, government officials, overnight stays for pilots, and a handful of people that come to Christmas Island for reasons other than angling, which is a very, very small amount. But you talk about the beach. So when we're sitting in our maniaba, when you are sleeping in your oceanside bungalow, oceanside means we're talking about 20 or 30 feet from the water. The waves are breaking on the reef 100 yards offshore, but between there and the beach, where we will stand there, we'll watch wrasse and we'll watch bonefish, and when the tide's up, we'll watch big jeets swimming right by. And when you're in the lounge sitting there, you're spitting distance literally from the ocean. And if you stand on this pristine white beach and look to your left and look to your right as you're looking out at the ocean, you can see approximately 5 miles or maybe more in each direction. You cannot see, because there are none, any structures, no light bulbs, nothing. There's nothing there. You are a short 10-minute drive from the airport on your own private beach, and you are utterly alone on your own paradise.
Yeah, pretty spectacular location. And we're going to get into, in the next episode, a little bit more about what that means for accessing a lot of these different fisheries and how quick and easy that is. But now you talked about the physical structure. Talk to us a little bit about the team and the people.
Well, yeah, the lodge is nothing without our people. So we employ 41 people at Christmas Island Lodge. 40 of 41 are local inhabitants of the immediately proximal villages of Main Camp and Banana. And so of the 40 locals that we employ, which serve every role you can imagine, from lodge manager to our service team, to our chefs and the kitchen crew, to those the women that are cleaning your rooms, doing your laundry, taking care of you, to our guide staff, to our drivers, our truck drivers, our boat drivers, our security team, and our everyone who is taking care of the lodge property, our landscapers, etc. You're talking about 40 people, and it's worth noting that on the island, what you would normally find in this culture is the extended family model, right? So when you go over to someone's house, it's not usually Mr. and Mrs. Johnson with their 2 kids. It would be Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, each of their brothers and sisters and their kids, cousins, grandparents, multi-generational homes. In a given home, you would have anywhere from 6 to 20 people living there. So by extension, these 40 individuals for whom paychecks are created each week, each 2 weeks, we believe we support directly about 300 people through these lodge operations. So we have an international host that is present to be a facilitator between the partners and the guests who are staying with us. And by the way, we don't have clients. That's not how we operate. We only have guests. Clients, a client is someone that I would shake hands with and receive payment from. We only have guests. So these are people you hug. These are people you get to know by first name. These are people whose family members you come to know through spending a lot of time in our return client. The term is return clientele, but of course the return guest visits, the percentage for Christmas Island Lodge is exceptionally high. And that is a direct result of being entirely and laser focused on guest service. That's what it's all about. It's about the fishing, but it's not really about the fishing. It's about the human connections that take place between the host and the hosted. The host, hostesses, and our guests, which we refer to our team as the Christmas Island Lodge, the CIL family. And yeah, almost everyone who works for us is related to each other. But even if they're not, still, we operate from that point of view. We're a team. We're a family. We thrive on welcoming and taking care of our people at the highest level of guest service within this industry. And by the way, that might be strategic. The training might be behind this behavior. But the fact of the matter is, the Kiribati people are natural hosts and hostesses. This is one of the least developed nations in the world. Many people there don't and can't afford shoes, for instance. They live in small thatched huts, many of which don't have walls that might be 6 feet by 8 feet, but it keeps them out of the sun, keeps them out of the rain, keeps them safe in those ways. But you have never heard people laugh as often. You have never seen people smile as often. And you have never felt as welcome as you will feel on Christmas Island, and specifically at Christmas Island Lodge.
Yeah. And I can tell you, we have worked there and sent clients there for a lot of years. I'll give you a little gratuitous pitch here, too. I mean, the thing that I believe really has elevated Christmas Island Lodge as this exciting offering is not only do you have the great customer experience and the friendliness of the family, the team that you put together, but it's also things like incredibly comfortable rooms, very clean, well laid out. You've got great food that, is safe and delicious and plentiful. You can always walk over to the coolers and grab an ice cold beer as you're sitting out there in the Maniaba. So it's a fantastic operation, and it really has, I think, kind of elevated the standard of what the options are for visiting anglers on Christmas Island.
Well, thank you for that. Again, it's all attributable to the team, but it's also attributable to a well thought out strategy of supplying ourselves and procurement of the supplies we need. So we do have a local partner there on the island, and he is an importer-exporter. His brother lives in Honolulu. He is also an importer-exporter. So we have a direct supply chain coming from Honolulu on each weekly flight on Fiji Airways. We procure all of our perishable orders every week. We're bringing fresh lettuce. We're bringing fresh fruits, fresh everything, meats, cheeses. We bake all of our own bread on site, but we do import all of those things. So when you get there, you're going to have the freshest of food. We very much rely on the fishery to provide us lobster, for instance, and tuna and wahoo and other fish species for consumption. And so you're talking about, you're not eating frozen food all week, right? This is a different deal. This is a different level of guest service, and it can be a wonderful culinary experience. I think that people are very pleased with that.
Oh, yeah. Well, we hear it all the time. And I'm glad you brought up the logistical supply chain, because my next question that I have for you, Bryant, we mentioned earlier how the remote nature and location of Christmas adds to the overall experience for anglers. But for a lodge operation, for a business, there are some huge challenges that are involved with running a business in such a far-flung location. And again, I don't want you to spend an hour talking about this, because I'm sure the list is long. But what are some of the big challenges that guests to Christmas Island Lodge and to the atoll itself might not realize, are dealt with behind the scenes?
Yeah. So how do you construct a building if you have no building supplies? You can't cut down the coconut trees. It doesn't make good lumber anyway, in most cases. So what happens? So we have to ship all of that in, and we do that 4 times a year. And by 4 times a year, I mean, or maybe 3, or maybe 2. Container ships will arrive from Fiji, and often they would start out perhaps in New Zealand, but Fiji would be that primary port of embarkation. And so we are ordering whether it's air conditioning units or marine grade lumber, because of the salt. It'll eat away at wood as well. It's not just metal. So marine grade lumber to create the rafters and the roofing on which these thatched mats are attached for our thatch roof bungalows, mirrors for the bathrooms, mattresses for the bedrooms, tile for the floors. It goes on and on and on. These will come in containers that we will purchase out of Fiji and then have shipped to us. And of course, it's not inexpensive. We pay $15,000 to $18,000 per container simply to have the right to load it on the ship and open it upon arrival. Very expensive doing business there. So, and then of course you have to plan ahead. So for instance, last year, the container ship was scheduled to arrive in July. It didn't. In fact, it didn't arrive and eventually get unloaded until mid-November. So you're dealing with massive logistical challenges, which for someone in my business is, I thrive on that. How do we address that? How do we rise to the challenge? These aren't things you walk away from. These aren't things you bang your head against the wall and say, I give up. This actually spurs you on to rise to those challenges and do it again with guest service and a quality experience as the torch and the leading light. So,
and on top of the building materials, there's the ongoing challenges, as you said, of bringing in fresh food, making sure that's plentiful. Every can of beer that's brought in, all the fuel for the boats, which again, when that's shipped in, maybe it's there, maybe it's not, and you have to look ahead to plan for that, because you can't have a disrupted week of fishing just because the fuel supply to the island is late. So you have to think through all of these things. And again, if you're a guest, if you're a client, visiting angler coming to the lodge, you should have to see and think of none of this. It should just be something that you don't even worry about. It doesn't even come to mind, because all of this is happening behind the scenes. But I'm often reminded, when people go to these places, they're like, oh, this, it would be so great to own a lodge in a place like this. What a wonderful life this would be. It's like, well, there's a lot happening that you don't understand. And in order to make it seamless and enjoyable and problem-free, so much goes into an operation and all the logistical planning and forecasting that, people don't oftentimes realize.
It's the culmination of a team effort. That's what it comes down to.
Well, tell us, Bryant, what does a typical day look like for an angler at Christmas Island Lodge? Walk us through kind of the fishing program, the meals, how a day unfolds when you're a guest at the lodge.
Absolutely. And let's start with arrival day, actually, and then we'll head to your common day throughout the week that you're with us. So arrival day, if you're coming from Honolulu, which is the vast majority of our guests do, or if you're coming from Nandi in the morning, we will pick you up at the airport. And so what will happen is you will offload the plane, you will walk across the tarmac, you will be received and handed a form to fill out, a form in addition to the one form you'll be given on the airplane, and you'll fill that out. It's very quick and easy. You walk through immigration, and then you wait for your bags. and your bags will come out. You will grab them and you will walk through the door, and there, right in front of you, will be our team in uniform. Very easy to see us there with our big Christmas Island Lodge logo there. Our trucks will be backed up to the door so that as soon as you walk through the door, our team will take your bags from you, welcome you, shake hands. We'll offer you, beer, water, sodas, something cold to drink. And while that happens, we'll be loading your bags in the truck, and you will then be loaded into the truck to depart, while you will look over your shoulder and see guests staying at all of the other lodges in a very long line to buy their fishing license upon arrival. Well, the fact of the matter is we're not into nickel and diming. We offer all-inclusive packages, and one important value out of that is that your fishing license has already been purchased for you in advance, days in advance, so that you get off that plane and you get right onto the truck and you're at the lodge in 10 minutes, not the 45-minute rough road drive to all of the other lodges, but just a quick 8-minute, 10-minute drive to Christmas Island Lodge. And so all of a sudden, before you know it, you're at the lodge. And as you enter our front gate and see the waves crashing on the other side of your thatch roof bungalow, you realize, you're in angling heaven now. And of course, you'll be greeted by our team in uniform that will be there, and our welcoming team will be handing you, fresh coconuts with straws in them, a fresh welcome drink, and cold towels, of course, which you might like if it's a warmer day there. And we'll in tandem welcome you and say, welcome to Christmas Island Lodge. And the team is ready to take care of you at that point. After that comes an orientation meeting, etc. Then we'll help you set up your gear and your rods. You'll meet the guide staff, and we'll settle in for cocktail hour, and life is good on Christmas Island. So the next morning, day one, which will be similar to the other 5 days of fishing, 6 days total, coffee is put on the dining table in the Maniaba in our lounge at 5:30 a.m. At 6 a.m., breakfast is served. And that might be eggs and bacon and fruit and yogurt and granola, and certainly, as I mentioned, coffee and some other beverages, whatever it might be, breakfast sandwiches, whatever the menu might be for that day. And then at 6:30, we'll depart. So you would then load up in the trucks, very comfortable trucks, padded seats, and you'll be transported in most cases, or in about half the cases, to the inner lagoon. We have a private boat launch. It's an 8-minute drive from the lodge, where you'll find our 2, and we have a third under construction, 40-foot outrigger boats that will be there ready to take you off into the far reaches of the inner lagoon, or on 2 or 3 days a week, depending on the week schedule and the guest's preference, because one thing we pride ourselves in is being flexible and catering to guests' requests and desires, whether you're going down to the Korean Wreck area or the backcountry we talked about, Huff Dam, Weiss Site. Regardless, you'll load up in the trucks, you'll be taken to the boat launch, or you'll be trucked to these other fishery areas where you will fish until very often around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at which point we'll reload. The boats will come back to the boat launch. The trucks will drive back to the lodge. You'll get back to the lodge anywhere from 4:30 to 5:30, at which point cocktail hour begins again. And, so the guides will unload your rods. The guides will come and collect your fishing boots, your wading boots, and your neoprene socks, et cetera. They will rinse everything down in our rod rinsing trays. They will spray off your boots. They'll get everything nice and clean, all with fresh water, and then place your rods in the rod holders that are unique to each individual suite within our 2-suite thatched roof bungalows, as well as then putting out your boots, neoprene socks, et cetera, in front of your door, which will be perfectly clean, sand-free, freshly washed. And so you don't have to do anything. All you need to do is just get off the truck and go into your lodge, get a little shade, whatever, drink some water. Of course, every room is outfitted with its own refrigerator, which is full of filtered water. We have a new reverse osmosis system that's going into effect here in the next couple months. Soda, beer, it's all in there. It's all cold for you. And of course, it's all inclusive. You're not getting charged for beer number 3. That doesn't happen at Christmas Island Lodge. And then you'll kick into cocktail mode. You'll have appetizers. It might be sushi, it might be empanadas. It can be a combination of things. Incredible food. And then at 7 o'clock dinner will be served. And so, life's pretty easy out there at Christmas Island Lodge.
Well, what's the vibe at the lodge in the evenings after a full day of fishing? Everybody's come home, they've unloaded, they've cleaned up, they've worked their way over into the lounge area. Talk to us a little bit about the vibe, any kind of, standout traditions or events that happen on a regular evening basis at the lodge?
Well, that depends on the week that you're there and the group of which you are a part. Some are very social, and sometimes it gets loose at Christmas Island Lodge. And very often it's certainly a wonderful, comfortable atmosphere and environment for anyone, whether you enjoy carousing with cocktails or sitting around telling fish stories or just quietly enjoying the day. Perhaps you do have to review your emails. And of course, our Starlink internet makes that very, very easy. Of course, it's complimentary, which, by the way, as your daily laundry service is complimentary, as everything that comes with it is that way. So then the vibe gets going. People have a few cocktails. Again, remember, the waves are lapping up right against your feet. Sometimes people will go out and fish for a little bit in the evening and stick fish right in front of the lodge, and then sit down to a wonderful dinner every single night. And there are some special events over the course of the week. I'm not really going to talk about them. I think it's better to be surprised by wonderful local villager interaction and traditions that take place at the lodge. So take that as you will, but just know there will be times that you will be enjoying music, very much live music, perhaps some performances, and all of it utterly authentic. This is not a canned luau per Waikiki standards, right? You're going to experience the true Kiribati people in the way that they have chosen to present themselves and their culture, not in a way that we Imatongs, we Westerners, have designed.
I love it. Well, Bryant, this has been a great part one to the Christmas Island Chronicles and conversation. We're going to continue this in the next episode, where we'll continue our conversation and dive into the details on species, seasons, gear and equipment, effective fly patterns. We're going to talk about the guides on Christmas Island, more travel logistics, and how best to prepare for a trip to this amazing fishery. More great information to come in part two of our Christmas Island episode. Bryant, thanks for joining us on part one here. We'll pick this up in the next episode.
That sounds great, Jim.
And that is it for this episode, the first of two episodes dedicated to fishing and exploring Christmas Island. If you're looking to plan a trip to Christmas Island, or even thinking about it, give us a call at Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, where our team can provide full details, share availability, and get things started for your next adventure. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research trips, source gear, equipment, and flies for your next destination, learn about upcoming podcast episodes, and stay up to date and dialed in on the latest news in fly fishing travel and adventure. Join us for our next episode, and remember, life is short and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by Brian Gregson and written by Jim Klug. Music is written and provided by bluegrass legend Woody Platt. Audio engineered by Sean McCormick. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more location profiles, destination information, travel news, and the industry's best selection of flies and equipment for destination angling.